The summit had convened in the heart of the galaxy, at a massive alien space station that orbited a star so distant it was visible only as a faint speck in the sky. The station itself was a marvel of alien technology, far beyond anything humans had ever conceived. Its shimmering walls pulsed with energy, and the air hummed with the sounds of countless alien voices, each speaking in tongues unknown to human ears. Representatives from various species gathered here, all eager to discuss matters of galactic importance. Among them, the humans, freshly introduced to this vast and intimidating cosmos, took their place at the table, bracing themselves for the inevitable ridicule. The humans were acutely aware of the stigma they carried. In the eyes of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, humanity was nothing more than a young species, still figuring out the basic concepts of warfare and diplomacy. The most advanced alien races had mastered energy weapons that could vaporize entire planets, while humanity still relied on ballistic projectiles, primitive weapons by comparison. The human ambassador, a seasoned diplomat named Sarah, stood at the front of the room, prepared to present humanity's defense capabilities. She knew the stakes of this summit. If they couldn't prove their worth in the galaxy's fragile political balance, humanity would forever remain an afterthought, or worse, a target. With a steady voice, she introduced the human firearm, an assault rifle. The weapon looked out of place in the high-tech setting, its sleek, metallic design contrasting with the advanced, glowing tech surrounding it. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Council," Sarah began, her voice confident, "this is a standard human defense weapon. It is reliable, effective, and simple. It does not rely on energy fields or complicated mechanisms but instead operates on the simple principle of kinetic energy." A ripple of laughter echoed through the room. The alien leaders exchanged amused glances, whispering among themselves. They were accustomed to weapons that harnessed the power of stars themselves, weapons capable of wiping entire civilizations off the face of the galaxy. The idea that these humans relied on something as primitive as bullets seemed laughable. One alien general, a towering figure of blue skin and multi-jointed limbs, leaned forward and chuckled. "Do you honestly believe," he sneered, "that such a relic from your ancient past could even scratch the surface of our shields? This thing," he motioned dismissively toward the rifle, "is nothing more than a glorified toy." Sarah held her ground, though the eyes of every alien in the room were now fixed on her. She knew the risks, but she wasn't about to back down. If humans were going to be seen as anything more than a novelty, she had to demonstrate that their technological might, though different, was no less effective. The alien general's words stung, but Sarah was used to the derision. Humanity's weapons were seen as nothing more than a curiosity to the galaxy's advanced species, who had long abandoned the need for projectile-based arms. They had mastered energy weapons, blasters, plasma cannons, and railguns that could melt through the hardest armor with ease. But they had long forgotten the power of simple, tangible force, kinetic energy. Sarah knew it was time to show them just how deadly human ingenuity could be. A murmur of disbelief passed through the crowd as Sarah calmly lifted the rifle, its weight familiar in her hands. She gestured for the demonstration to begin. The room fell into a hushed silence as the aliens waited for the spectacle to unfold. They thought they knew what to expect. The bullet would disintegrate on contact with the energy shields, a harmless display of human delusion. The testing area had been carefully prepared. Alien energy shields had been set up, their glowing surfaces crackling with high-voltage power. The general had insisted on making sure every defense was active, to leave no room for failure. The human soldier, a young man named Michael, stepped up next to Sarah. He was calm, his face unreadable, despite the tension in the air. The stakes were high, and he knew that failure would mean the end of humanity's chance to be taken seriously in the galaxy. Michael aimed the rifle at the nearest shield. With a sharp pull of the trigger, the rifle's report shattered the silence. The first bullet flew straight toward the shield, hitting it with a crack that echoed through the room. To the alien's surprise, the shield didn't simply absorb the projectile, it buckled. The bullet passed clean through the energy barrier, tearing through the air and impacting the array behind it. The shield flickered and dimmed, its once bright surface now crackling with damaged energy. A stunned silence descended over the room. Alien eyes widened in disbelief. The general's smug expression faltered, his disbelief turning to confusion. Michael didn't flinch, firing another round. The next bullet slammed into another shield, and again, it passed through without resistance. The aliens watched in stunned silence as the human weapon continued to disable the alien defense systems, one by one. The aliens were silent, their faces filled with shock and uncertainty. The general, who had laughed so loudly just moments before, now stood motionless, his mind racing to understand what was happening. No energy weapon had ever been so easily countered before. This human rifle, so simple in design, was bypassing their most advanced shields with ease. The general looked around the room, hoping for some explanation, but none came. He had seen firsthand the power of humanity's weaponry, and it was undeniable. Sarah stood resolutely, watching the reactions of the aliens around her. She knew what was happening. The aliens had underestimated humanity in every way possible, dismissing them as primitive and weak. But in that moment, the tide had shifted. The power of human ingenuity had demonstrated itself in a way that could not be ignored. Michael continued to fire, each shot further dismantling the alien technology. It wasn't that the rifle was more powerful than the alien weapons, it wasn't. But it was effective in ways the aliens had never imagined. Where their energy weapons relied on complex systems that could fail, humanity's firearms relied on pure, unyielding force. There was something both reassuring and terrifying about that. The demonstration continued, and the damage to the alien technology piled up. The shields flickered and failed, the advanced tech once thought invincible rendered helpless against the simplest of human weapons. The aliens, who had thought themselves so far superior, now began to question their assumptions. How was this possible? How had they been so wrong about humans? They had mocked the humans for their simple weaponry, but now they were beginning to see it as something far more dangerous. The human soldier, still calm and focused, finally lowered the rifle, signaling the end of the demonstration. Sarah stepped forward to address the now silent room. "We may not have the advanced weapons you do," she said, her voice steady but firm. "But we have something that you might have forgotten, the power of simple physics. We rely on the basics, the fundamentals. We don't need to complicate things when we can rely on what works." The silence in the room grew heavier. The aliens looked at each other, trying to process the ramifications of what they had just witnessed. It was clear that the humans weren't just some backward species to be dismissed. They were resourceful, inventive, and capable of far more than anyone had given them credit for. The alien general, who had once mocked humanity's weapons, now stood humbled. His eyes narrowed as he realized the full implications of what had just occurred. In that moment, he knew that humanity, though primitive in their ways, had something more powerful than anyone could have anticipated. They had the ability to adapt, to think outside the box, and to use their limited resources in ways the galaxy's most advanced species could never imagine. The room buzzed with confusion and disbelief as the demonstration unfolded. The energy shields, once thought impenetrable, flickered under the assault of the human bullets. The alien generals, who had spent centuries perfecting their energy-based technologies, now watched as their advanced systems faltered before a simple projectile. The soldiers and diplomats from various species exchanged nervous glances, their confidence in their superiority now shaken. Michael, the human soldier, stood calm and unyielding as he continued to fire. Each shot he took seemed to break down another layer of the alien defenses. The sound of the rifle's crack echoed in the chamber, each bullet finding its mark with precision. The aliens, who had once mocked humanity's reliance on primitive weapons, now stood stunned as their own technology was systematically dismantled. The alien general, a massive figure with glowing blue skin, was visibly unnerved. His expression, which had once been filled with arrogance, now faltered. His eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from the damaged shields to the human soldier, who was executing every shot with a terrifying calmness. He had been so sure that the human rifle would be nothing more than a joke. But now, in front of him, it was clear that he had severely underestimated the capabilities of the humans. As the demonstration continued, the aliens, once dismissive of the human weapon, began to realize the vulnerability in their own tech. The shields that were meant to block everything from energy blasts to matter-based projectiles now stood impotent against the relentless kinetic force of the human bullets. The laughter that had filled the room earlier had died down, replaced by a stunned silence that lingered like a thick fog. It was then that Sarah, the human ambassador, stepped forward to clarify what the aliens had just witnessed. She explained that while the aliens had focused on energy weapons and shields that could absorb or deflect beams, they had completely overlooked one critical factor: simple kinetic force. The human assault rifle worked on the principle of a basic law of physics: objects in motion tend to stay in motion. The human bullet, small and seemingly insignificant, carried enough energy to breach their shields and cause serious damage to their highly sensitive tech. The aliens, still grappling with the revelation, exchanged murmurs. Some of the more skeptical factions were silent, unable to deny the effectiveness of the human weapon. Others, more open-minded, saw the potential in humanity's approach, something that no one had considered in centuries. The truth was undeniable. Despite the complexity of their technology, the aliens had overlooked the simplest and most fundamental forms of weaponry. The projectiles, though crude in comparison, were able to bypass their defenses in ways their sophisticated systems couldn't. The general, his face flushed with a mixture of disbelief and anger, approached the human delegation. His steps were heavy, and the tension in his body was palpable. He turned to Sarah, his voice low but filled with venom. "What is this trickery?" he demanded. "How could your primitive weapons do this?" Sarah remained calm, answering with the same measured tone that had guided her throughout the summit. "It's not a trick. It's understanding the fundamentals. Your energy-based systems are impressive, but they're based on complex principles that have their limitations. Ours, on the other hand, is based on raw force. It's reliable, simple, and effective." The general scoffed, clearly still unable to accept the reality before him. "You mean to say that we, who have mastered the power of stars, can be undone by a simple bullet?" His voice was filled with disdain, as if the very idea of being bested by something so basic was beneath him. Sarah nodded. "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. That's something you've forgotten in your pursuit of ever more complicated technologies." A tense silence followed. The alien representatives, once smug in their superiority, now stood in stunned disbelief. Some of them were quietly whispering among themselves, questioning their earlier assumptions about humanity's capabilities. Others, particularly those from the more conservative factions, seemed unwilling to accept that a species they had considered inferior could prove to be such a formidable force. One of the aliens, a slender, silver-skinned diplomat, leaned toward Sarah. "But how does this work? How can something so basic be so effective against our technology?" Sarah smiled, recognizing the curiosity in the alien's voice. She stepped forward and explained in more detail, outlining how the human weapon utilized simple kinetic energy. The bullets, made of solid materials, had mass and velocity. When they collided with the alien shields, they carried enough momentum to penetrate the energy fields. The shields, while capable of dispersing energy, were not designed to absorb solid projectiles traveling at such high speeds. The human bullets weren't just an annoyance, they were a force to be reckoned with. As the explanation unfolded, the aliens began to grasp the implications of the demonstration. They had spent centuries advancing their technology, perfecting energy weapons and shields. But in all that time, they had failed to account for the basic principles of physics. Humans, with their relatively rudimentary tech, had managed to exploit this oversight. The realization was humbling. The general, still struggling with the idea that his once invincible technology could be bypassed, turned to his subordinates. He barked orders, demanding that they recheck the shield's power levels, questioning how the human bullets had been able to penetrate them. It was clear that the general's mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation for the human success. Sarah remained poised, her confidence growing with each passing moment. She knew that humanity's greatest strength lay not in the complexity of their technology, but in their ability to think outside the box, to adapt and innovate in ways that others couldn't or wouldn't. The human soldier, Michael, had proven that in spades. He had remained calm, executing each shot with precision and expertise, and in doing so, he had given humanity a foothold in a galaxy that had long looked down on them. The alien representatives, now fully aware of the situation, began to murmur among themselves. Some of them were still unwilling to acknowledge the humans' prowess, but others had begun to see them in a new light. The debate over human technology was no longer a question of whether it was inferior, but rather a question of how it could be integrated into the galaxy's defense strategies. The general, visibly shaken but unwilling to admit defeat, turned to Sarah one last time. "This is unexpected," he muttered. "But you have only proven that your weapons can break through our shields. That doesn't mean you're capable of defeating us." Sarah didn't flinch. She knew the challenge ahead was far from over, but for the first time, the aliens were beginning to see humanity not as a weak and primitive species, but as one that was resourceful and capable of turning the tide in ways no one had anticipated. "This is only the beginning," she said softly. "And we're just getting started." The general's eyes narrowed as he processed her words. He had underestimated humanity in ways he could never have imagined, and in that moment, he realized that the humans were not to be trifled with. This was only the first step in a much larger game, a game where the stakes were higher than anyone had anticipated. The tension in the room was palpable, but one thing was clear: the humans had earned their place at the table. Whether the alien general wanted to admit it or not, the simple projectile, dismissed as primitive by so many, had struck a powerful blow to the arrogance of the galaxy's most advanced species. The lesson had been learned, albeit the hard way. The room remained heavy with silence, thick with the weight of the moment. The alien leaders, many of whom had witnessed countless battles and witnessed the fall of entire civilizations, were now forced to confront an uncomfortable truth: humanity, once dismissed as an insignificant player on the galactic stage, had just demonstrated that their technology was not only effective but dangerous. The energy shields, once thought impenetrable, had fallen to a simple human rifle. The alien general, still visibly stunned, stood motionless, his pride shattered in the wake of the demonstration. As Sarah watched the reactions around her, she knew that the true implications of the demonstration were only just beginning to sink in. The aliens were reeling from the unexpected power of humanity's weaponry. They had thought themselves invincible, their advanced technologies capable of withstanding any attack, but humanity's simple ingenuity had proven them wrong. Now, instead of viewing the humans as weak, backward, or primitive, they were forced to consider humanity as a legitimate threat, one that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. The general's eyes flicked to Sarah, his expression hardening. He had no choice but to acknowledge the reality before him, but his mind raced for a way to maintain his dignity. He knew that the damage to his reputation was irreparable, but his pride wouldn't allow him to admit defeat so easily. Instead, he turned to his fellow alien leaders, attempting to regain control of the situation. "You've proven that your weapon can penetrate our shields," the general said, his voice low but filled with a barely contained fury. "But that does not mean you have won the war. Shields are only one part of a much larger picture. Do you truly believe that your projectile weapons are a match for the superior technology we wield?" Sarah met his gaze with a calmness that unnerved him. "It's not about what we can match, General," she replied coolly. "It's about what we bring to the table that you've overlooked. Your technology is powerful, yes, but it is also fragile in ways you never expected. Our weapons may be simple, but they don't rely on complex systems that can fail. They don't depend on shields that can be bypassed or dampened. They rely on one thing: force." The words hung in the air, leaving a ripple of uncertainty among the alien delegates. Sarah's response, though logical, was unsettling. It was one thing to dismiss a primitive species as irrelevant, but another to realize that humans had the ability to challenge their most sophisticated technologies in ways that could have far-reaching consequences. The alien general opened his mouth to retort, but no words came. Instead, he glanced at his subordinates, seeking any sign of support. One of the alien diplomats, a sleek, silver-skinned species known for their advanced scientific knowledge, spoke up. Perhaps we have underestimated humanity. They may lack the sophisticated energy technology we possess, but this demonstration shows that their simplicity can be just as effective, if not more so, in certain situations. The general stiffened at the comment, his pride wounded further. He had been trained to lead with authority, and the idea of being outwitted by such a seemingly primitive species gnawed at him. He couldn't accept it, not without finding a way to reassert his dominance. Still, the silver-skinned diplomat continued, her tone thoughtful. Our energy shields, while powerful, were designed to block high-energy projectiles. They were never intended to handle mass-based weapons. The human bullets, simple though they are, possess a certain efficiency that we cannot ignore. Sarah felt a surge of vindication, but she knew better than to let the moment go to her head. The aliens were beginning to understand the full implications of what had just occurred, and there was no turning back now. The knowledge that humans were capable of such ingenuity, capable of exploiting the weaknesses of alien technology, was already beginning to shift the balance of power in the room. The alien general clenched his fists, his arrogance still lingering but now tempered by a growing sense of unease. He finally spoke, his voice laced with barely concealed frustration. Fine. You have your weapons, and you have shown that they can bypass our shields. But you are still a primitive species, one that has not yet learned to master the more advanced technologies of the galaxy. What can you truly offer us? How can you claim to be a force worth respecting when you are so far behind us in other areas? Sarah's answer was simple, direct, and spoken with a calm authority that seemed to pierce the general's defense. We offer something you can't replicate. Ingenuity. Adaptability. The ability to take what we have and make it work in ways others have dismissed. We may not have the advanced energy weapons or complex technologies you possess, but we have something just as powerful, the ability to outthink our enemies and use whatever resources we have to our advantage. The room grew quieter still as the weight of Sarah's words settled over the alien delegates. They had once regarded humanity as a novelty, a species whose rise through the ranks of galactic diplomacy was little more than an amusing footnote. But now, in the face of undeniable evidence, that view was rapidly changing. Humanity had just shown that they could not only hold their own but could potentially turn the tables on even the most advanced alien technologies. The alien general, who had spent the past few moments trying to regroup and maintain his authority, now turned his gaze to the floor, his thoughts racing. He knew that no matter how much he wanted to deny it, humanity's demonstration had proven a critical point. The simple power of kinetic force, once overlooked and dismissed as antiquated, had emerged as a serious challenge to his entire worldview. He had seen the human soldier's calm precision, the way each shot was delivered with purpose and confidence. The human approach, though seemingly unsophisticated, had been anything but. As the realization dawned on the other alien leaders, the general's anger shifted to a quiet, grudging respect. There was no denying it. Humans had just earned a place in the galactic order. They had proven that, despite their lack of energy weapons, their raw power lay in their ability to think beyond the confines of conventional warfare. The question now was whether the galaxy was ready to accept them as more than just a curiosity. The tension in the room began to shift, and Sarah could sense the change. Some of the alien factions, particularly the more conservative ones, were still hesitant. They would need time to process the implications of humanity's demonstration. But others were beginning to see the potential in forging alliances with such a resourceful species. After all, if humanity could challenge their technology in such a profound way, they might be just the wild card needed to shift the balance of power in the galaxy. The general's voice broke through the silence once again, but this time, it lacked the biting contempt that had once defined it. We underestimated you, he admitted, his tone grudging but sincere. You are not as weak as we thought. Sarah nodded, her calm expression betraying no sign of triumph. No, General. We are not. The moment hung in the air, a turning point in the galactic balance of power. For the first time, humanity was being seen not as a primitive species, but as one with the potential to reshape the galaxy itself. The seeds of respect had been planted, and though the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, humanity had taken the first, crucial step toward securing its place among the stars. The question now was whether the galaxy would be ready to accept them, or whether they would continue to resist, unwilling to let go of the belief that they were still the superior force. The tension in the room was palpable as the humans and aliens prepared for the next phase of the summit. The demonstration had already shaken the foundation of the gathering, but the real test of strength was about to begin. The alien general, still clearly struggling with the humiliation of his earlier defeat, was not about to let the situation go without asserting his authority. His pride was on the line, and he was desperate to prove that humanity's success with a simple weapon didn't mean they were capable of standing toe-to-toe with the galaxy's mightiest. "I have a proposal," the general said, his voice cold but steady. The room fell silent as the alien representatives turned their attention back to him. "Since we've seen that your weapons can breach our shields, perhaps it's time we test your true abilities. Let us see if your soldier can truly prove himself in combat. I challenge him to a duel." A murmur swept through the room. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown at the feet of the human soldier. Michael, the soldier who had conducted the demonstration, stepped forward at the request of his commanders. His expression was unreadable, his focus unwavering. He had known this was coming. He had prepared for this moment. The general's challenge was nothing more than an attempt to salvage his pride, but it was also an opportunity to prove once and for all that humanity was not to be underestimated. Sarah, standing beside Michael, glanced at him briefly, her eyes searching his face for any hint of doubt or hesitation. But Michael's eyes were clear, his jaw set with determination. He was ready. Whatever the alien general had, whatever technology he could bring to the duel, Michael was prepared to face it head-on. The rules were simple: one-on-one, no interference. The alien general, confident that his advanced energy weapon would easily defeat the human soldier's rifle, took his position. His weapon crackled with power, a sleek and deadly design that shimmered with an energy field capable of reducing anything in its path to ash. Michael, by contrast, stood with nothing but his assault rifle, the very same weapon that had caused so much trouble for the aliens just hours earlier. The contrast was stark, but Michael was undeterred. His faith in his weapon and his training were enough. The moment the duel began, the general unleashed a blast of raw energy from his weapon. The beam shot toward Michael with blinding speed, a wall of destructive power that seemed unstoppable. But Michael was faster. He ducked behind cover, using the environment to his advantage. The energy blast slammed into the structure where he had been standing, sending a shockwave through the room. But Michael wasn't there anymore. He was already moving, calculating his next move. The general, for all his advanced technology, had relied too heavily on brute force. He fired again, but this time, Michael was ready. He fired his rifle, the sharp crack of the shot cutting through the air. The bullet flew with pinpoint accuracy, striking the general's weapon. The alien's energy weapon malfunctioned, sparking and sputtering as the delicate systems that powered it were disrupted. The general's face twisted in surprise and anger. He had never expected the human to be so quick, so precise. Michael didn't wait. He advanced, moving with the skill and speed that came from years of training. He knew the general would try to recover, to recalibrate his weapon, but he couldn't afford to give the alien any time. He fired again, this time aiming for the general's weak points, his joints, his armor's gaps, areas where the alien's bulky body wasn't protected by energy shields. Each shot rang true, and with each passing second, the general's confidence began to erode. The alien general, despite his advanced technology, was now the one on the defensive. He had underestimated the human soldier, believing that sheer firepower would win the day. But Michael's speed, precision, and tactical thinking were proving to be far more effective than the general's reliance on overwhelming force. The general raised his weapon again, but it sputtered, unable to fire. The weapon was damaged beyond immediate repair. Michael took advantage of the opening. With a final, calculated shot, he disabled the general's energy weapon completely. The alien general was left standing there, weaponless and vulnerable, his pride in tatters. His entire strategy had been based on the assumption that superior technology would win the day, but humanity had shown him otherwise. The general staggered backward, unable to believe what had just happened. Michael stood tall, rifle still in hand, his expression unwavering. He had done what was necessary. The duel had not been about winning in the traditional sense, it was about proving a point. Humanity wasn't a species that relied on overwhelming firepower alone. They relied on adaptability, precision, and the ability to turn any situation to their advantage. And in that moment, Michael had proven that those qualities were enough to overcome even the most advanced alien technology. The alien general, breathing heavily, took a step back. He was humiliated, defeated in front of his peers. His once confident posture had crumbled, replaced by a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. His eyes met Michael's, and for the first time, there was no mocking superiority in them. Instead, there was something far more powerful: recognition. You've won," the general muttered, his voice strained. "Your tactics, your precision, they are not what I expected." Michael didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The silence that followed spoke volumes. The other alien leaders, who had once regarded humanity with disdain, now looked at them with new eyes. They had seen firsthand what humanity was capable of. It wasn't just the weapon or the soldier. It was the spirit of humanity itself. The ability to fight, to adapt, to overcome obstacles with whatever they had at their disposal. That was what made humans dangerous, not their technology. Sarah, watching from the sidelines, felt a swell of pride. This was the moment humanity had been waiting for, the moment they would no longer be looked down upon. They had earned their place among the stars, and the alien general's admission of defeat was a clear sign that things were changing. No longer would humans be the ones to scavenge for scraps of power. No longer would they be dismissed as an afterthought in the vastness of the galaxy. Humanity had proven itself. The general, still reeling from the loss of his pride and his weapon, turned to his fellow delegates. He knew the next steps were critical. His species had suffered a blow to its reputation, but the galaxy was a place of politics and power, and it was clear that humans would play an important role moving forward. The question now was not whether humanity was strong enough to survive, it was whether the other alien species were ready to accept humanity as an equal. As the tension in the room began to dissipate, Sarah took a deep breath. She knew that the summit would never be the same again. Humanity had taken its first step into the galaxy as something more than an insignificant species. It had shown the galaxy that it was a force to be reckoned with. And in that moment, Sarah knew that the future was theirs to shape.